distinguished scholar, and recently in May was the winner of the prestigious Dan David Prize in Israel for her many cultural accomplishments. So congratulations on winning that award, Barbara. Can you hear me, Barbara?
I can, thank you.
Okay, good. I was a little concerned there for a moment that I was going to be doing the interview myself. So, well, Barbara, you were, yes, that would have been, but I should tell you that last week I interviewed a Holocaust survivor who, and then the fire alarm went off intermittently through the entire Zoom interview from his condo. So this will be a breeze, I promise you. You know, you have a connection to Toronto. You were born in Toronto and actually raised in the city, right? And I did my homework, and I read that as a young 12-year-old girl on Shabbat, you would wander around the city and discover the various museums like the Royal Ontario Museum. So you had this fascination with museums at an early age, is that correct?
That's absolutely correct.
What was it about museums that caught your attention as a young girl? What was
what happened was that I think probably from the age of about maybe 10 or 11 till I was 12 when we moved up north. You know, my parents sent me to various Jewish after schools. I went to Ord Street Public School, and then they sent me to the Verbundschule, which was across the road, and a few doors down was the Peretz Schule. And neither of those worked out, so they sent me around the corner to the Darcy Talmud Torah, and which was awful. It was a modern, so-called modern cheder. The only thing modern about it was that boys and girls were in the same room. That was awful. I had nightmares about it, and I remember them to this day. But as a result, I had this period where I became so frum that I could do nothing on a Saturday. I couldn't write, I couldn't listen to music, I couldn't go to the movies. I couldn't tear paper, I could do nothing. The only thing I could do was to walk to the Royal Ontario Museum, which was my personal favorite, and it had 6 floors, and each Saturday I would visit a different floor and then start all over again from the basement. And when I got tired of that, I would walk across the park to the Sigmund Samuel Gallery of Canadiana, because at that time it was in a separate building. And then when I exhausted that with Cornelius Craighoff and his rural scenes of Quebec, I would head for the Ontario Gallery of Art, but I was never as interested in paintings as I was in material culture and objects, but also just simply in the range of, I mean, I just thought the Royal Ontario Museum was the best. The totem poles in the stairwell, the geology, the rocks, the Greek attic vases, but my favorite was the basement with all of the Native American and Native Canadian material. And I don't know, I think I've always been much more inclined towards craft than art, and much more inclined towards artifacts than paintings. Although, of course, you know, growing up and I'm married to an artist, and my father was an artist, that's shifted. But I think for me, those collections were much, much more interesting than what I found at the other two. So I really spent most of my time at the ROM.
One of the things you described about Toronto was that the Jewish cemetery, while you were living there, was like a map of Poland. What did you mean by that?
So, you know, what was astonishing, because I mean, I didn't really regularly visit the cemetery, but when my father passed away, my mother passed away, they were buried there because my father belonged to the Upters, to the Landsmannschaft, to the hometown society from his family. So that would be a Patuf, or Abt in Yiddish. And those hometown societies, those Landsmannschaften, were intended to help new immigrants, you know, obviously from the same hometown or the same region, and to help them by giving them interest-free loans, and you could buy a burial plot. And so all these hometown societies have their own areas in the cemetery with these plots where their members are buried. So when you go there, there's the Upters, and then there's from Ostrowiec, and from Kielce, and from Stashev, and from Lagiv, and from, you know, just from the whole, it's all from that one, mainly from this one region, Świętokrzyskie. It's for me, it was amazing, because I felt like I could visit all these towns, and there they were, the former inhabitants of these towns. So it really was like, not a map of the whole of Poland. There was a tendency for people who came from the same region to go to where their families and where their neighbors had settled. And so in Toronto, it was my father's region.
Now, before we get to the serious discussion about the Poline Museum, in doing my research, I found a couple of very interesting items of trivia about you, Barbara. So one of them is that you have one of the largest Jewish cookbooks in the world, about 1,000 cookbooks. Is that correct?
Probably more, well, there's probably more now, but yeah.
And then also you have the largest, that's the way it was described in the article I read, the largest collection in the world of paraphernalia associated with bagels. Is that right?
I think so, because I'm not aware of anybody who has, I mean, lately not so much, but there was a time when I just really pursued absolutely everything and anything having to do with bagels, including that I bought a domain, bagelmuseum.com. So, you know, I'm not aware of, maybe there's somebody else out there with a similar obsession, but not to my knowledge.
Well, I just have to tell you, I thought, you know, I'm interviewing this distinguished scholar, one of the greatest Jewish scholars in the world today. And then I read about this bagel thing, and I just thought that just kicked you up a notch in my estate.
Well, thank you very much, because never underestimate the importance of the apparently trivial. This is my life's motto.
That's right. All right, so let's turn to the Poline Museum, and just as background, you and I met almost exactly a year ago when my wife Randy and I were part of a very small tour led by the acclaimed historian Deborah Lipstadt, and I believe you were good friends. I could see you were good friends with
absolutely.
her. Absolutely,
I'm a big fan.
And so I got. Yeah, she's a superstar. There's no question, like you. And so I got to tour the Poline Museum and got to meet you and got to hear you on a couple of occasions. So one of the things that I found fascinating about the Poline Museum is that when I came to it, I had a certain expectation. And I'm sure it's an expectation that many people have. And that is, it was simply going to be a Holocaust museum. That I was going to come to a museum in Warsaw for the Jewish people, where 3 million Polish Jews were exterminated and killed in a fairly recent time. And that would dominate the entire museum. And what I found is, I believe there's 7 galleries, and the Holocaust is only one of the 7 galleries. So it almost seemed like there was a deliberate effort not to let the Holocaust dominate the core exhibition at the museum. Am I right about that?
You are right indeed. But what I should add is that the museum is located facing the monument to the ghetto heroes. So it's actually located in the very place where the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising broke out on April 19th, 1943. And it completes the memorial complex. So this is and it does it in the following way, that we go to the monument to honor those who died by remembering how they died. And we go to the museum to honor their memory by remembering how they lived. And in that way, the museum completes the memorial complex. And it could be said that there are 2 major modes of Holocaust memory. One mode is to remember how Jews died, and the other is to honor them by remembering how they lived. And that the task of memory isn't complete if we only remember how they died. So in that way, we are, in a sense, I would say, respectful of the Holocaust without being a Holocaust museum.
Right. And just for the people watching this, Barbara, in the background, we have the building. I assume that is Poline Museum.
Yes, it is.
Poline Museum.
Yes, it is.
And how long did it take for? Because I believe it's 6 years old. I think it opened in 2014. Am I right about that?
That's correct. Yeah, but
how long
did it take? Well, the museum arose as an idea in 1993, and it was inspired by the opening of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington. And what happened is that representatives of a Jewish NGO in Poland, the Association of the Jewish Historical Institute of Poland, which had been established in 1951 in Poland, representatives went to that opening, and they were very moved by the exhibition at the Holocaust Museum, which was, you know, if in 1993, it was really, really groundbreaking. It was such a filmic, such a multimedia exhibition, and it was so well conceived and well executed. And their thought was, if there's a Holocaust exhibition or museum in Washington, there should be at least an exhibition of the history of Polish Jews in Warsaw. And Sheika Weinberg, who was the director of that project, said, no, no, you should think in terms of a museum, and it should be a multimedia narrative museum. So it began as an idea in '93, and it was really only a project. It wasn't until 2005 that this little Jewish NGO in Poland had managed to get the project far enough along that they could approach the Ministry of Culture and National Heritage and the city of Warsaw and invite them to join this Jewish NGO to found the museum as a public-private partnership. So 2005, the museum is founded. There's an architectural competition. The Finnish architect, Brainer Maklamaki, wins. And then in 2006, I was invited to lead the development of the permanent exhibition. I'd been involved as a consultant since 2002. And then in 2013, we opened the building. In 2014, we had the grand opening with the opening of the core exhibition.
And I described that we can see the Poland Museum in the background. You mentioned the monument to the ghetto heroes. We can actually see that.
I'm going to move over so that you can actually see it. Just a second.
Move over. You can actually.
Now you can see
that's and you have the actual caricatures of the featuring the ghetto heroes there.
Right. Well,
and it's actually very moving.
Actually, Abe, the side that you're seeing, that's behind me, is in fact the Great Deportation of about 300,000 Jews from the Warsaw Ghetto to Treblinka in the summer of 1942. And on the other side is a little less than a year later is the fighters in the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising.
Okay. So, what are the other core exhibitions that the Poland Museum features other than the Holocaust?
Oh, okay. So there are 2 points here. One is that we present a 1,000-year history of Polish Jews. And what's important about that history is that it is 1,000 years of continuous Jewish presence in the historic territory of Poland. 1,000 years. It's the single most important period in the history of Polish Jews, is 1,000 years. So that's the first thing. The Holocaust is the largest of 7 historical galleries. But the exhibition doesn't begin with the Holocaust, it doesn't end with the Holocaust, but it sets the Holocaust within a history of Polish Jews, which is really different from where you normally encounter the Holocaust, whether it's part of the history of World War II, or it's part of a history of anti-Semitism, whatever it might be, or it's set within a constellation of other genocides. Here, it is set within a history of Polish Jews, a 1,000-year history. So that's the first thing. The second is that we do really wonderful temporary exhibitions. And the current temporary exhibition, which opened on June 26th, just really 2 weeks ago, that exhibition, it's called Here is Muranów, and it's about the neighborhood where this museum is located, which was the Jewish neighborhood in Warsaw before the Holocaust. It was home to the largest Jewish community in Europe, and for a time probably in the world, about 300,000 Jews. And that history, that community was really obliterated when the Germans demolished the ghetto at the end of the Warsaw, when they suppressed the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And they demolished the Warsaw Ghetto, which means they actually demolished what had been the Warsaw Jewish neighborhood, so that they left an ocean of rubble. That's all that was left. And with it, the memory of that neighborhood and of those who lived there also vanished. And so in order to recover the layers of that history, we've created this exhibition, which actually goes from the 18th century to the present. And it looks at who lived there, how this place has been remembered, what it meant to those who lived there before the Holocaust, what it means to those who are living there now. So it's about the neighborhood. But we've done all kinds of exhibitions on Frank Stella and the wooden synagogues, on blood, uniting and dividing, looking at blood in Christianity and Judaism, on March 68, the anti-Semitic campaign of March 68, on, just any number of just a whole range of, and they're award-winning. They have really amazing attendance. We had, I think, about 117,000 people visit our March 1968 exhibition. So yeah, we have a very fine series of temporary exhibitions, about more or less two a year.
Okay. What about life after the Holocaust for the Jews in Poland? Do you cover that in any of the galleries?
Yes, absolutely. So following the Holocaust gallery is the post-war years gallery. And that takes us from the end of the war to the present.
And what is life for Jews in Poland presently like?
Well, well, first of all, there has, since 1968, I would say, that those Jews who stayed in Poland, the younger generation, some of them decided to do something about that experience, which is what I must say that experience, what I mean is this. Some of them grew up in families where they knew they were Jewish, and others grew up in families where they only discovered they were Jewish as a result of this anti-Semitic campaign. And those who actually remained in Poland, a number of them began what became a renewal of Jewish life on a small scale. And that really took off after the fall of communism in 1989. And so when you ask me that question, I turn to what I call the renewal of Jewish life on a small scale. And it can be seen very, I think most vividly, probably in Warsaw and Krakow. But those are not the only places. There's also Lodz and Częstochowa and Lublin, and there are other places as well. But the main centers of this renewal are in Warsaw and in Krakow. And say, for example, in Warsaw, there are at least four congregations. There's the Orthodox congregation in the old Nozik synagogue, but there are now progressive congregations. What we would consider, one of them we would consider probably conservative, which doesn't exist in Europe, but it's a variation, a more traditional variation of progressive. That's the Eitz Chaim, which is a lovely, really a lovely congregation, a very warm and very welcoming congregation. And then there's, a Beit Warszawa and Beit Polin and others. There's the JCC, which is really very active. There's now a branch of Hillel. There's the American Jewish Committee has offices. And there's an organized Jewish community which supports all kinds of activities. There's a foundation for the preservation of Jewish heritage in Poland. The B'nai B'rith is active. So I would say that the small scale should not take away from or in any way diminish the vitality of this Jewish community. And the same can be said for Krakow. But at the same time, there is also enormous interest in Jewish life and culture and religion in the non-Jewish Polish public. And so we like to say, and it's a theme of our post-war years gallery, we like to say small numbers, big presence. In other words, the actual number of Jews in Poland today is, absolutely small and relatively small. But I would say the presence of Jews in Polish consciousness is enormous.
Barbara, the next question is directed to the period before March when the Polish government closed the Poli Museum because of COVID-19. What I wanted to ask you is I would imagine that the vast majority of the visitors to the museum are
Excuse me just a moment.
Fernando and 2 Intercom guys are coming here to look at that.
That's fine.
They've asked to be quiet.
Okay. Our intercom is not working, so the maintenance people are coming, but it will not destroy
no
our...
problem. Just tell me what you need to do and I'll...
I'm good. My husband's taking care of it.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for me. So my question is this. In that period, pre-closure or because of COVID-19, we're going to come back to COVID-19. As I was saying, I imagine that the vast majority of the visitors are Jews who come from around the world, including survivors. What about local Poles? Poles come too?
No.
So I'm wrong about that.
No, let me tell you about our visitors. So when we first opened, about 70% of our visitors were Polish visitors from Poland. And about 30% was international. In this high season right now, at this stage, 5-6 years after we opened, and this is the high season, normally, if this were normal, it would be about 50-50. But in the winter, let's say November, December, January, it will go back to 60-40 more or less. But we have, we've had about 4 million visitors since we opened. And we're getting, 600,000 more or less, 600,000 visitors a year. And, there's not a Jewish museum in North America that gets that kind of visitation. I'm not counting Holocaust museums. That's a whole other species. I'm not talking about the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum or Yad Vashem. But if you look at any Holocaust museum in North America, any Jewish museum in North America, no one approaches those numbers.
And what do you think accounts for those numbers and the interest of the local community?
Oh, I think that I think this museum was created not because it would be nice to have one, but because there was a feeling that it was urgent to have one. There was the feeling that this was a place where before the war, 3,300,000 Jews lived. And where they lived, which is to say cities and towns, large and small, they formed a very substantial part of the population, even a majority. So for example, in my father's hometown of Apatov, 10,000 people, 6,500 were Jews. In Białystok, between 50, 70, 75%, depending on when you count, were Jews. Can you imagine Toronto being 75% Jewish, or Philadelphia? Warsaw was approximately a third, 30 to 33% of the population was Jewish. Lodz, the same thing. Krakow, about 25%. So what that means, and the smaller towns could be 65, 75, 80, even 90%. So just think about it. Like, let me give you the example of my father's town. September, if I'm not mistaken, September 22nd, 23rd, 1942, 2 weeks after I was, October 22nd, 23rd, about 3 weeks after I was born. I was born on September 30th, 1942. About 3 weeks later, the 6,500 Jews of Apatov were deported. Most of them were deported to Treblinka, to the death camp, and about 500 were marched to Sandomierz, to a forced labor camp. What that means is that in 2 days, 65% of that town disappeared in 2 days. Can you imagine 65% of Toronto disappearing in 2 days? All of a sudden, in 2 days? So this is a very, very specific situation. This is not like a kind of gradual migration over a long period of time. This is an abrupt depopulation that has an extraordinary effect on this place. And that effect, people have been living with that during the war, immediately after the war, and actually to this very day. Now, whether the reminders have pretty much disappeared, or they are absolutely in evidence in the case of towns that still have intact cemeteries with thousands of tombstones, or still have intact synagogues that have been converted into cultural centers, archives, libraries, or into some other form, or whole Jewish communal building complexes like in Tokochin, whatever it might be, there is, whether it's fully in consciousness or just deeply felt, a sense that something devastating happened and that there is a profound feeling of absence, of a void. Now, and so how do people address that? Well, all kinds of ways. But what I would say is, when I say that there is a profound, if you will, Jewish presence in Polish consciousness, that presence is to some degree animated by a profound sense of absence and an enormous desire to, in a sense, fill that void. And so as a result, there's a whole range of projects. There's the Krakow Jewish Culture Festival, which began even before the fall of communism. There are efforts by local inhabitants, non-Jews, to take care of Jewish cemeteries, to have days where they clean the cemetery, where they, I mean, there's some really incredible devoted local historians. There is a number of organizations like Forum for Dialogue that run a school for dialogue across the country and work with high school students to recover the Jewish past of their towns. So I would say that somehow there is a kind of reckoning that I would characterize as constructive engagement. And that is an engagement with the Jewish past of these towns, and a sense that that past is actually an integral part of what these towns once were, and an integral part of their history, and a way of dealing with the tragedy by recovering the memory. So that would be what I would call, it's not the only way, it's not, because there's also a marking of mass graves and sites of genocide. I mean, there are also, you can see it in Kielce, and the setting up of centers for trying to address the history of anti-Semitism and anti-Jewish violence. There's also because that's also a part of Jewish presence and Polish consciousness, a very, very important part of it, and a very painful and difficult part of it to address. But I would say that there, that's how I'd come at it. That's how I'd express it.
I was very pleased that when the Tobey Foundation arranged our tour, we dedicated, I believe, a half a day to visit the Pula Museum. It took several hours to really absorb it and appreciate everything. And one of the things that struck me too was the quality of the guide in the museum.
Oh, good. I'm happy to hear that.
Very knowledgeable, very skilled, very able to answer questions. And, you know, I've been to museums around the world, so I have a sample size to choose from, and I thought she was one of the best. So how do you choose your tour guides, and what kind of education do they have about Jewish history?
Well, so first of all, we our tour guides, the ones that we certify, undergo at least a year of training. And the training is both substantive in terms of the actual content. It is also geared towards what visitors will actually see and what they will need to communicate in relation to their visitor experience. And also we're trying very, very hard to select guides who communicate well in English. And one of the challenges is that oftentimes traditional guiding in Polish and in Poland is very, very factual and very kind of information and not storytelling and not responsive to the visitor, and rather kind of, speaking, communicating a lot of information, moving on. And we are trying very hard to improve the communication skills of our guides so that they are much more responsive to the visitor, and because it's a big exhibition and it's not about getting in as much as you can, it's rather about communicating effectively so that a visitor comes away having had a very good experience and having gotten the most important messages.
What is the general reaction of the survivors of the Holocaust who come to the museum?
It's fascinating because so there are certain survivors that, or children of survivors, that have said they'll never sit. I mean, I have a great case for you. So David Azrieli, let me take another Canadian. Let me take him as a case. So when we were creating the wooden synagogue ceiling and roof, which is a real centerpiece and highlight of the core exhibition, I approached Naomi Azrieli thinking that David, being so passionate about architecture, who very late in his life went back to school and got a degree in architecture and is famous for his buildings, I thought to myself, perfect fit. Canadian, build architecture, Poland, we're in business. And Naomi said, it's a wonderful project. She's very sympathetic, she said, but David gave her express instructions that not a penny of his wealth was to be spent in Poland. That was that. So that was like out of the question. Well, what happened is that there were high school students in his hometown that were given an assignment. And what was the assignment? It was to communicate or to contact the most famous person, I think, the most famous person from their town. And lo and behold, who was the most famous person from their town? David Azrieli. So they write him a letter. And in the letter, they explain what was the project and why they were so impressed and why they were reaching out to him. Well, he was blown away. And the next thing that happened is that Naomi came to Poland and she went to the town and she met with the high school and the high school students. And she was absolutely blown away. So she said to them at some point, what can we do for you? What would you like? So they said something like a swimming pool, I think, or a gym or something of that order. She said, no, that we don't do that, but we do educational projects. So actually, I think she supported some kind of educational project. So then following that, we reached out to Naomi about collaborating with her on translating Holocaust memoirs from their series. They have a wonderful series that they've published on Toronto survivors of their Holocaust memoirs and their Holocaust testimony. And we said, listen, we think that Polish readers should be reading Polish translations of these memoirs. And also, the book that I did with my father, They Call Me Meyer July, on his memories of growing up in Poland, of his childhood in Poland before the Holocaust. And she said, yes, let's do it. So that for me is a kind of all right, that's a very, very exceptional story. But I have other stories where there are, particularly the children of survivors, more so than Holocaust survivors themselves, who say they'll go to Germany, but they won't come to Poland. However, sometimes there is something that triggers a willingness to come, that lets them overcome. Sometimes it's even a presentation of the museum where they're just simply shocked, or it might be something else. And they overcome this lifetime resistance to setting foot in Poland. And they almost invariably, not, there are exceptions, but almost invariably, it is a turnaround that somehow or other, they don't lose the reasons why they were reluctant, but they also discover something that they could never have imagined. And sometimes they really they come back over and over again. They come back with their families. They come back to their families' hometowns. So it varies. And then there are survivors who basically have always felt a very strong connection to Poland despite the Holocaust. They are themselves, like Zygmunt Rolot is a classic example. What he went through is nobody's business, but he still feels a very strong connection to his home city of Częstochowa and a very strong connection to Polish language and culture. And for him, there are two Polands. There's the good Poland, there's the Poland that we hate and the Poland that we love. There are two Polands, and he's attached to the Poland that we love.
Barbara, you mentioned a temporary exhibit that began in late June. COVID-19, of course, led to the closure of the museum in March. Is that being devastating for the Poland Museum to be closed
it has,
for all those months?
Indeed. You know, the thing is, like, basically what happened was that on March 11th, as I recall, there was an announcement from the Ministry of Culture that all these cultural institutions had to close, completely understandably. I mean, thank goodness. I mean, it was the only way. So Poland Museum was very nimble and immediately intensified their presence online. And even within a very short time, I can't remember, a matter of days or weeks, they actually launched a radio station, Radio Polin, with 12 hours of broadcasting, if you can imagine such a thing. Maybe there are other museums with radio stations, I mean, but I don't know who they are. But a radio station, probably the only one in Poland for sure, but I think it's pretty rare. And they began to not only migrate programs online and continue to provide online what they always did, but they all started to create new content online for families at home with kids, for online teaching, for all of the kinds of needs they could anticipate under these circumstances. And then, but what that meant was that during those 3 months of being closed, they lost all their income from tickets, for events, for concerts, for temporary exhibitions, for the permanent exhibition. They lost all the income from the museum shop, all the income from the cafe. And also they lost all the income from space rental, which is actually a very important part of their earned income. And that represented about 30% of their budget. Now that we reopened the building with we started on June 26th only with the temporary exhibition on Muranov. And that surprisingly we've been able to accommodate, I think, over 500 visitors the first weekend, over 1,000 visitors in the first week, obviously limiting the numbers, all the safety protocols, and it's not been doing too badly, although nothing like what we get under normal circumstances. And then I think August 1st, if I'm not mistaken, we're opening the core exhibition, and that too will be open with all the safety protocols in place. But I don't know when we'll be able to fill our 460-seat beautiful auditorium for big events, and when we'll be able to do some other things as well. But gradually, and I just hope that the pandemic will really be under control and there won't be another kind of wave and then another round of closings, et cetera. So I think we're doing pretty well, but the loss of income is devastating. And so we've actually launched an emergency fund campaign to try to make up for the shortfall in 2020, and also to prepare ourselves to really be resilient as we're able to open up more fully in 2021.
Do you have a fear for the future of your museum and for museums generally? Is that something that you talk about among your colleagues in the museum industry?
Well, I would say that in the United States, the latest thing I saw from the Alliance of Museums is that about a third of American museums, of museums in the United States, anticipate that they might not reopen. A third, one third. That's enormous. And even a museum, such a good museum, relatively small museum, and so beloved as the Tenement Museum, has closed indefinitely. Now, indefinite, interesting language. Indefinitely is not the same thing as permanently. I mean, it's a bit like what Isaac Bashevis Singer said about Yiddish. He said between dying and dead, there's a difference. So I would say, so we don't know. We don't, if I may suggest that anyone could turn off their mic until we turn them back on again, because I'm hearing some sound.
Yeah, no, I am too. Please
Yeah.
be aware that we can hear that noise. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. So I would say that that's an issue. However, I think as museums go, I'm thinking that Pauline Museum, I just put it this way. A third of its budget generally comes from the Ministry of Culture and National Heritage. A third comes from the city, and we have to raise, and a portion comes from the earned income of the museum, which of course has diminished radically, and a third, and the rest comes from fundraising that we do through the Jewish NGO, through the Association of the Jewish Historical Institute of Poland. And that really requires the generosity and the support of our donors, most of whom are in North America. And it's been, I mean, that Jewish NGO, that little Jewish NGO that had no experience and no track record of ever creating such an institution and ever raising the $40 million that it took to create the core exhibition, that little Jewish NGO has been really, really amazing. But we depend, and it's through them that we're able to raise money for the museum's programs, and that we're really counting on that. So I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm an incorrigible optimist. I have enormous faith in this museum. I think that the private-public partnership is the making of it, and I think it's so important also to Poland as a country. And I think that there is a recognition by the Polish state, even under the current right-wing government, that this museum cannot fail, that it would be damaging to Poland, actually, believe it or not. I think there is the feeling that this museum represents Poland in a way that can be trusted, that this exhibition was not made by the state. It wasn't made by the ministry. It wasn't made by the city. It was made by a Jewish NGO. And that it is respected worldwide and trusted worldwide. It won the 2016 European Museum of the Year Award and the 2016 European Museum Academy Prize and the Europa Nostra Best in Heritage Award and umpteen innumerable other prizes. It has been recognized internationally. And so I have the feeling that it is among the museums in Poland that have to survive, that there's no option. It must survive. And I'd like to think that Jews in the diaspora and in Israel will also believe that it needs to be supported and it has to survive. And let's hope that it can survive with a kind of resilience that will let it be the best that it can be, because I think it has an enormously important role to play.
Well, the only thing you admitted from that description out of humility was your involvement, your leadership as the chief curator, because no doubt that is a huge factor, Barbara.
Thank you.
In the realization that this museum will continue.
Thank you.
And I say that very genuinely.
Well, I thank you. So basically like this, I see, first of all, this was a team project to the First Order and continues to be a team project to the First Order, which I think is also a secret to its success. Number one. Number two, so my role I started as a consultant in 2002. And I was invited to join the project by Jerzy Halberstadt, who actually led the museum led the project to create the museum for about 11 years. And he was its first director. And he really was, incredible visionary. So I'm very indebted to him for having the confidence and the faith to trust me with this responsibility. So my first role was, the name of my title was leader of the core exhibition development team. That was my beginning. And then and now I am the Ronald S. Lauder chief curator of the core exhibition, of which I am totally and utterly proud. Actually, I'm proudest of still being with the project, that they didn't want to get rid of me, because, you know, often with these big projects, you sort of, I don't know whether it's a scorched earth situation, but people get burnt out, they leave, they go on to something else. Either they can't stand it anymore or the project can't stand it anymore. But I'll stay with it for as long as I can and as long as they want me. However, what's important is how I see my role. And how I see my role is as a midwife, as an orchestra conductor. And I see my role, my primary role, was to bring out the very best in all the people that I was working with. And I do believe, in that regard, I believe that I succeeded. And I worked with an incredible team. I worked with a wonderful team, an international team of scholars from Poland, from Israel, from the United States. I felt like I sat at their feet and I got like five new PhDs, what I learned from them. And we involved them at every stage of the process. I worked with 2 wonderful design companies, with a fantastic team of young Polish curators, with a team of fabricators, of Polish craftsmen who know how to do things with their hands, and with wood and with tile, and with every conceivable, who know how to hand paint a gallery, how to gild the walls, with a team of managers, what I learned about professional management. Oh my God. So I would say, I mean, I like to think, I think of myself in that's how I think of myself, as my primary gift to this museum. I would start there. But I would say that there were 3 aspects, I think, of my own configuration, of my own formation, that gave me a kind of leg up in terms of this job, so to speak. And it's not even a job, it's a vocation or a calling would be a better way to describe it. And that is, first, I am the child of Polish Jews, very much so. My parents born and raised in Poland. Pardon me. That would be the first thing. And I grew up in a very Polish Jewish world in downtown Toronto. I grew up on Cecil Street. I was a couple of blocks from Kensington Market and from the Sherman Bakery, and from all those places that those of you who are from my generation will remember well. So that's the first thing. I'm a child of Polish Jews. The second thing is that my specialization is East European Jewish culture, and especially Yiddish, and especially, of course, Poland. But not limited to Poland, but basically Poland. So that means that academically, I come very well prepared, and I come also from a discipline other than history. I'm trained as a folklorist, an anthropologist, ethnomusicologist, in a material culture. So I bring a kind of multidisciplinary academic specialization in East European Jewish and Yiddish culture. But the third thing is that I have a particular interest and background in museums in 2 regards. One, practically speaking, that is to say, as a curator, having curated for the YIVO Institute for Jewish Research, for the Jewish Museum, for the Smithsonian. But secondly, as an academic, as a scholar who's interested in the history and theory of museums generally, and in the history of how Jews represented themselves and have been represented in World's Fairs, in museums, and heritage sites, in all kinds of situations. And it's an area in which I've published, and an area in which I've taught at the graduate level. I teach, I'm no longer, I'm professor emerita at NYU, but for years I taught a graduate seminar called Museum Theater, and I also taught another one on World's Fairs. And of course, the Jewish component of each of those courses was very, very strong. So that's a very, very unusual convergence. And I think that because I came not from a museum world, but from the academic world, but with that kind of interest, experience, and thinking about museums, it put me in a really very, very good position to lead the development of the project. And it meant that I was able to work with my colleagues on an equal footing, even though I was not expert in the areas in which they were expert. But I was also able to work creatively with the design team and to bring a kind of I think, and I hope, a kind of sophisticated perspective to both dimensions, and to work with the team to create a kind of coherence for the exhibition that I think is unusual in the degree to which it's so coherent intellectually, but also as a visitor experience. And so it's something that I'm actually writing about, because there were two reasons why I wanted to take this project on. When I was invited, when Jerzy Halberstadt called me and asked me if I would lead the development of this team, the development of this exhibition, I thought for myself, I thought very, for a minute. And basically I said yes. And I said yes for two reasons. And the first reason was that I believe that this project was of such exceptional importance that I wanted to bring everything that I had, that I could bring to bear to make this the best possible museum that it could be. And I was at a stage in my career where I was tenured, I was distinguished professor at NYU. I didn't have to worry about my career. I mean, I could do whatever I wanted. And this was what I wanted to do. But the second reason I wanted to do it was because I wanted to think new thoughts about museums. And I thought to myself, what better way to think new thoughts about museums than to make one? And especially to make a multimedia narrative exhibition, which at the time in 2002 and 2005 and 2006 was actually not my favorite kind of exhibition. I had, I think, a pretty limited idea of what these multimedia narrative exhibitions were. And I thought they were going to be a bunch of computer screens, which I couldn't think of anything worse. And so I thought, you know what? If I have such resistance to this idea, it's a reason to tackle it, because there must be something going on here if I'm so resistant to the idea. And of course, working on it with these wonderful designers, it was a total, complete, and utter revelation. And so it was a win-win all the way down the line.
So Barbara, we have only enough time to cover a couple of subjects that are, I think, of be interest to our viewers. The first is I was very interested to read that you described the inclusion of the State of Israel in a museum as risky business, and that was the term you used, because I must tell you, I would have thought that it would be clear sailing, and that it would be very simple and clear, but it isn't like that, is it at all? Why is that?
So, okay, so first of all, including Israel in the exhibition is not controversial as such. And of course, in the post-war gallery, there is a section that deals specifically with the formation of the State of Israel, with the front page of a Polish newspaper declaring the establishment of the State of Israel. Not a problem at all. Well, the only problem was that we had some colleagues that wanted us to be flying an Israeli flag and thought this should be a much bigger part of the post-war years gallery, that it wasn't, prominent enough. I mean, okay, we can argue about that, but fundamentally, basically, there's nothing on the contrary, it's part of the history of Polish Jews. It was extremely important of course, in that post-war period, and especially in creating the basis for legal immigration to Israel. And it's also linked to Jews in DP camps, and they're waiting for the opportunity to either immigrate to the new state or to the United States, which took longer, or elsewhere. So that's, for the core exhibition, it's absolutely not an issue. And frankly, for Polin Museum, it hasn't been an issue either. I mean, we have not had a problem at all in running, and on the contrary, we have a wonderful relationship with our Israeli partners. We receive all these Israel groups, these young groups, the adult groups. We work with Israeli tour operators. We work with Israel's Ministry of Education. We have a wonderful liaison who works for us and is our liaison to Israel. So as far as Polin Museum goes, I think that we continue to build a very strong and very productive relationship with Israel in our educational programs, cultural programs in Israel. Here we have a Polish-Israel youth exchange that's been going for over 10 years, where Israeli students come to us and we send Polish students to spend time in Israel. So for Polin Museum, this is absolutely not an issue. And I think for Poland generally, that, in many ways, Poland is Israel's, I would say, most supportive country in Europe. So, and is considered to be, and Israel is considered to be a strategic partner for Poland as well. So I think we have to put Poland aside, put Polin Museum aside. Where you can see this issue is you can see it in the United States and you can see it in Germany. I haven't really been tracking it in other countries because the most dramatic examples and the most dramatic recent examples are in Germany, but there's an earlier, very interesting earlier one in Chicago at the Spertus Museum. So what's the issue? The issue has to do with museums that I would say, well, let me be specific. In the case of Germany, the Jewish Museum Berlin, they did an exhibition called Welcome to Jerusalem. Now, Berlin being this multi-ethnic city, and particularly with a very, very strong Muslim population, their exhibitions very often are, if you will, multi-religious. They deal with, let's say, Jews, Christians, Muslims, Jews, Christians, Jews, Muslims. And I once asked their former program director, Zilli Kugelmann, I once asked her, what is the secret to the success of your temporary exhibitions and how do you choose them? So she said to me, she said, in our case in Berlin, if our museums are too Jewish, nobody will come. And if they're not Jewish enough, nobody will come. So we have to strike this kind of balance. And also what we like to do is to do things that are not necessarily comparative, but that are in the spirit of putting Jews in relation to the others that they're living with in Berlin and elsewhere. So therefore, when we do the exhibition on Welcome to Jerusalem, we treat Jerusalem as a tri-religious city. That in Jerusalem there are Muslims, there are Christians, there are Jews, there are Arabs, there are Palestinians, and we try to deal with the city as a whole, and we try to deal with all of its aspects. Well, what was so problematic was that, first of all, Jerusalem is a very contested city. So you're stepping right away, it's a minefield. You're stepping right away into a very delicate situation, and it's very, very difficult to deal with it without raising hackles. And so what's happened is that I would say that the Israeli Foreign Ministry and even the president's office, in a way, they have their antennae out. It's almost like sort of that magnet thing where you go around the beach looking for metal that will detect. So they have a kind of detection system for anything that could be construed in the slightest way as not 100% supportive of Israel and its policies. And if they detect a slight deviation from this 100%, I would say, let's call it, pro-Israel is maybe the wrong language, but if they detect any deviation, then they are very vigilant about trying to address it. And that's what happened. And this is what happened with Welcome to Jerusalem exhibition at the Jewish Museum Berlin. Now, it's a very complicated, long story. I don't want to go into it, but let me just say that the upshot was that the very distinguished director of that museum stepped down. He just said, I don't want to be a distraction. This is not going to end well. I will step down. And they hired a new director. And that's very extreme. That's really, really extreme. So that would be an example. And I think one example is probably enough, but I could give you other examples as well.
My last question relates to the future of the Polling Museum. And for the purpose of this question, let's put aside the issue of COVID-19. Let's assume there is a vaccine that's discovered and that we move on from this horrendous period of this pandemic. But you have a situation currently in Poland. You described a right-wing government. You recently had a presidential election, and the right-wing government was reelected. You have President Duda with a new term in office. You have a situation with your museum where the director of the museum, a very respected historian, was not reappointed. You had a new director. You have a situation where you described the Polling Museum and the government's attitude as a black sheep and not a traditional museum. And you finally have a situation where you have conflict. You have policy conflicts between the attitude of the Polish government towards what the museum should be, and of course what you aspire and what you want to achieve with the museum. And so with all of that conundrum set up before you, what is the future of the Pulley Museum, Barbara?
Okay, so what I would say is that there's sort of, I'd come at it maybe this way, that the value, among other things, the importance of the Jewish NGO in this public-private partnership is that when it comes to the hiring of the director, the Minister of Culture cannot unilaterally hire or fire the director. The position of the director has to be resolved by consensus among the three partners. And so the only power with regard to the director that the Minister of Culture has is to veto. In other words, to prevent the consensus. And that's what he did. And, you know, it's another story as to why. And so as a result, in order to reach a consensus, after a year of efforts to have him reinstated, the resolution was that our deputy director, Zygmunt Stempinski, would become the director. And he will be director for the next 3 years because at that point he'll be of retirement age. And in fact, we'll be back in the same situation that we were in last year. Now, that resolution, from our point of view, was a very good resolution in the sense that the Minister of Culture did not have the power to put in place somebody he would like to have, a right-wing historian, someone he could control, let's say. And so he didn't get the person he wanted, but he did get to veto the person he didn't want. Now, the private Jewish NGO didn't get the person they wanted, but they did manage to avoid getting someone they didn't want. So this was the outcome. Now, you know, that's not the worst outcome. That's not the worst outcome. So I take that as an indication going forward. Now, what I would say is that we are there. It came out in a very interesting way during a kind of extreme right-wing senator's criticism of the Minister of Culture, who basically who said to the Minister of Culture, I've got 15 questions for you. Why are you funding all these Jewish projects? Why are you giving millions of zloty to clean up the Jewish cemetery in Warsaw? Why are you giving Pulley Museum all this money? And why are you creating a museum of the Warsaw Ghetto? And what kind of a museum is it going to be? Is it going to be a traditional museum, which is, of course, you know, what he was hoping for, that would tell, quote, an objective history, which means that would follow Polish historical policy? In other words, defend the good name of Poland? Or will it be a modern museum, bad, like Pulley Museum, where history is a starting point for debate? Because this sort of historical policy is a policy to defend the good name of Poland. And of course, for us, a 21st century museum is a forum, not a temple, and it is a place of informed civil debate of difficult issues. And it is, if you will, an institution that strengthens the resilience of civic society and that models what informed civil debate looks like, which is to say that it is respectful and it is informed. And so, but from the point of view of the Ministry of Culture, the museum should make people feel good, make them proud to be Polish, and should not encourage dissent. It should not encourage, the way they put it is conflict. And the sort of, I think what never occurred to me, because it was never an issue before, it's not something I ever heard before, but only in the last, say, 2 or 3 years, we're starting to hear it. And that is an equation of the addressing of anti-Semitism as an expression of anti-Polishness. In other words, that to address even in a, I mean, we address anti-Semitism. We had a whole exhibition about anti-Semitism. We address anti-Semitism, but we address it in an historically informed, historically responsible way, and in a way that does not traffic in stereotypes of, you know, Poles drink anti-Semitism with their mother's milk, which I think is an absolutely horrible you know, that is not the kind of, I mean, that's the sort of statement that we would fight against vehemently. So, but the idea that you can't touch the topic, that if you touch the topic, that you are, quote, anti-Polish. And so that is actually really, that is really hard. It's a very, very difficult equation to overcome. And that, I think, is one of the big challenges.
Well, could you get a phone call from the Minister of Culture saying, look, we don't like a certain exhibit? Is that something that actually could happen?
Yeah, and it's happened. Sure, it's happened. But how does it, what does it mean? Let me tell you what it means. The Minister of Culture's power is the appointment of the director to veto and to withhold money. Now, according to the agreement, the ministry and the city have to provide a certain amount for the operation of the museum. Open the doors, clean the windows, turn on the heat, the air conditioning, pay for the security, etc. The basic operation. But then, for specific projects, we've always gone to the ministry and to the city and asked for support. So we went to the ministry and we asked for support for the March '68 exhibition. And what did we get back? And because ordinarily they were giving us funding for a concert, for an exhibition, for a publication, for an educational program, no problem. But for this one, we got back, we don't like the name of the exhibition. We called it Estranged. March '68 and its aftermath. What do you mean estranged? Because in Polish, it means aliens at home. Obce w domu. Aliens at home. What do you mean? You know, Poles and Jews have lived together. They're brothers. They've lived together for centuries. We don't like it. So the director said, you know what? We can change it. We'll just call it March '68 and its aftermath. Who's on your organizing committee for that conference? So in other words, basically, they said, we're not going to fund it. So it meant that they could withhold the funds. But because we're a private-public partnership, the Jewish NGO said, we'll raise the money for it. So they couldn't stop us from doing it. We did it. And we raised the funds for it. And it broke all attendance records for an exhibition of this kind in the history of Poland. 117,000 visitors. There are Jewish museums in America that don't get that in a year for everything. So,
Yeah.
So it's, and I mean, the story of that exhibition and what incensed them the most and everything else, that's another whole conversation.
Yeah. Well, we could spend another hour talking about this. And I just want to say that your enthusiasm and passion and skill is inspiring. And I'm sure I'm not speaking alone. I'm the one who has a voice. So I wanted to let you know what an honor it is to do this interview, and want to thank you for giving of your time and for being with us today. And thank you to all our viewers for another session of Afternoon with Steve. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you very, very much, Steve, and for your careful preparation and for a conversation that I enjoyed very, very much. So I thank you, and I thank all of you who listened in.
Well, you'll get a recording of it, and thank you again. Goodbye, everyone. Have a nice day.
Bye now.